My husband stood in front of the entire executive team and laughed. "She's just a pretty secretary who answers phones," he said, gesturing at me like I was office furniture. "Don't take her opinions seriously." Everyone laughed with him. I smiled back. Then I told him he had 30 days to vacate my building. The same building his company leased for $85,000 a month. The building I'd owned for 2 years while he thought I was just filing papers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The conference room on the 42nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Late afternoon sun was streaming in, making everything look golden and important. There were 12 people sitting around that massive oak table, all executives from Meridian Consulting, the firm where my husband, Derek, had made senior partner 6 months ago. I was standing near the back wall, next to the refreshment cart, because that's where Derek had told me to position myself that morning. "Just bring coffee when people need refills," he'd said while adjusting his tie in our bathroom mirror. "And Sophia, please don't try to contribute to the actual meeting. These are complex strategic discussions." I'd nodded and smiled, the same way I'd been nodding and smiling for the past 4 years of our marriage. The meeting was about Meridian's expansion plans. They wanted to lease additional floors in the building. James Cardwell, the CEO, was talking about negotiating better terms with the property owner. "We've been model tenants for 7 years, he was saying. "Surely we can leverage that into reduced rates." Derek jumped in, that confident tone he always used when he wanted to impress people. "I actually think we should be more aggressive in the negotiation. The owner of this building is probably some overseas investment group that barely pays attention. We could probably push for 15, maybe 20% reduction. The market rate for prime downtown real estate has actually increased," I said quietly from my spot by the wall. The entire room went silent. 12 faces turned to look at me like I'd just started speaking in ancient Greek. Derek's expression was a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. "Sophia, honey, we're in the middle of something important here. I'm just saying that comparable properties in this area are leasing for." "Sophia." Derek's voice had that edge to it now. "Nobody asked for your input, sweetheart." James Cardwell actually chuckled, trying to ease the awkwardness. "It's fine, Derek. What were you saying about the negotiation strategy?" But Derek was on a roll now. He stood up, and I could see he was going to make this into a joke, the way he always did when he wanted to dismiss me in front of other people. "Look, I apologize for the interruption. My wife is very sweet, but she's just a pretty secretary who answers phones and schedules appointments. She doesn't really understand commercial real estate or corporate strategy." He gestured toward me with this affectionate smile that made it seem like he was being charming instead of condescending. "Don't take her opinions seriously. She's here to pour coffee, not to contribute to actual business discussions." The room erupted in polite laughter. Not cruel laughter, exactly, more like the uncomfortable chuckling people do when someone in power makes a joke at someone else's expense and everyone feels obligated to go along with it. I felt my face get hot, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned how to do that over 4 years of marriage. How to absorb humiliation without showing it. How to make myself smaller so Derek could feel bigger. Marcus Rivera, the CFO, was the one who tried to move past the awkward moment. "Anyway, about these lease negotiations. We should probably schedule a meeting with the property management company to discuss." "You don't need to go through the property management company," I said. My voice was calm, almost casual. "You can negotiate directly with me." Derek actually laughed out loud. "Sophia, what are you talking about?" I reached into the leather portfolio I'd been carrying, the one Derek thought contained meeting minutes I was supposed to be taking. I pulled out a folder and walked to the conference table, my heels clicking on the polished floor. I slid the folder across the table to James Cardwell. "I'm talking about the fact that I own this building. I purchased it 2 years ago through a trust, and your company, Meridian Consulting, has been my tenant for 7 years total, 5 years before I acquired the property, and 2 years since." The silence in that room was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It felt physical, like the air itself had solidified. Derek's face went through about 5 different expressions in 3 seconds. Confusion. Disbelief. A flash of something that might have been fear. Then a forced smile. This is obviously some kind of joke. Sophia, this isn't funny. James Cardwell had opened the folder. He was scanning the first document, the deed to the property, with my name clearly listed as the owner through the Westbridge Property Trust. His face had gone pale. This appears to be legitimate, he said quietly. I looked directly at Derek. I'm not joking. I own this building. The one you've been working in for 5 years. The one you just suggested paying me less rent for. I paused. And since we're having this conversation, should probably mention that your lease is up for renewal in 90 days. I'm thinking a 20% increase would be appropriate, given current market rates. Unless you prefer to find another location? Derek was standing frozen, his mouth slightly open, like his brain was trying to process information that didn't fit with anything he thought he knew about reality. Oh, and Derek? I added, my voice still perfectly calm. You're not invited to the renewal negotiations. I'll be dealing directly with Mr. Cardwell and the board. After all, you're just a senior partner. You don't really understand property ownership or landlord-tenant relations. The thing about watching someone's entire worldview collapse is that it happens in stages. First there's denial, then confusion, then this desperate scrambling to find an explanation that makes sense within their existing understanding of reality. I watched Derek go through all of those stages in about 30 seconds. This is insane, he said, his voice rising slightly. Sophia, where would you even get the money to buy a building? This building is worth. He looked at James Cardwell like he was asking for backup. What did the last assessment value this property at? $42 million, James said quietly. He was still looking at the documents in the folder I'd given him, flipping through pages with increasing discomfort. Derek turned back to me, and now there was something almost frantic in his expression. See? That's ridiculous. You're a secretary. You make, what, $52,000 a year? Where would you possibly get $42 million? I didn't pay $42 million, I said calmly. I paid $31 million 2 years ago. The property value has increased since then. Good investment, actually. Marcus Rivera, the CFO, was leaning forward now, his analytical brain clearly trying to work through the numbers. Even at $31 million, that's an enormous capital requirement. The down payment alone would be. I paid cash, I interrupted. No mortgage. It simplified the acquisition process. The room had gone completely silent again. Everyone was staring at me like I'd just announced I was actually an alien or a time traveler or something equally impossible. Derek's face had gone from pale to flushed. This is bullshit. Sophia, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's not funny. These are serious people having a serious business meeting, and you're. Mr. Cardwell, I said, ignoring Derek entirely and addressing the CEO directly. If you'd like to verify the information, you can contact Robert Martinez at Prestige Property Management. He's been managing this building on my behalf for the past 2 years. Or you can contact Patricia Vance at Coastal Trust and Estate. She structured the trust that holds the property. Both of them can confirm that I'm the owner. James Cardwell was already pulling out his phone. I'm going to do that, he said. His voice was still polite, but there was steel underneath it now. Because if this is true, it represents a serious conflict of interest that should have been disclosed. I agree completely, I said. Which is why I'm disclosing it now. Derek was shaking his head, this almost manic quality to his movements. No. No, this doesn't make sense. Sophia, you work as my secretary. You answer my phones. You organize my files. I'm also your wife, I said. Who you've never asked about her financial situation or professional background or literally anything about her life before you married her. One of the junior executives, a woman named Amanda who I'd actually had coffee with a few times, was looking at me with this expression of dawning realization. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Wait, she said slowly. Sophia Westbridge. Are you related to Westbridge Development? I smiled at her. I founded Westbridge Development when I was 26. Sold it 7 years later for substantially more than I paid for this building. Derek actually stumbled backward a step, like the information had physical force. That's impossible. I would have known. When we got married, you would have. You never asked, I said simply. On our second date, you asked what I did for work. I told you I'd sold my company and was taking some time to figure out what I wanted to do next. You said, "That's nice, honey," and then spent 45 minutes telling me about your career trajectory at Meridian. You never asked another question about it. But you work as a secretary, he said, and there was something almost desperate in his voice now. Why would you work as a secretary if you owned a building worth $42 million? Because I was bored, I said. And because when I met you, you seemed interesting and ambitious, and I thought it might be nice to understand your world better. So I applied for an administrative position at your firm under my maiden name. I got hired on my own merits. And for nearly 5 years, I've been watching how this company operates from a perspective most executives never see. James Cardwell's phone buzzed. He looked down at it, then up at me. His expression had changed completely. Robert Martinez just confirmed that Sophia Westbridge is indeed the owner of this property through the Westbridge Trust, and that Meridian Consulting has been a tenant for 7 years, with Ms. Westbridge acquiring ownership 2 years ago. The room erupted into chaos. Everyone started talking at once. Marcus was asking rapid-fire questions about the trust structure. Amanda was saying something about due diligence. 2 other executives were having a heated whispered conversation about disclosure requirements. Connor Sheffield sat there with his mouth hanging open, looking like someone had just told him gravity worked sideways. But I was watching Derek. His face had gone through the denial stage and was now settling into something that looked like shock mixed with genuine fear. Because he was finally starting to understand what this meant. His wife, the woman he introduced as my secretary, Sophia, at company events, owned the building his firm leased. Which meant she was, technically, his landlord. Which meant every condescending comment he'd ever made, every time he'd dismissed her opinion or told her to just pour coffee and look pretty, every joke he'd made at her expense about her simple little job, all of it had been said to someone who had more wealth and power than he'd ever have. And everyone in this room now knew it. I met Derek 5 years ago at a charity gala for children's literacy. I'd been invited because I'd donated a significant amount to the organization, though I'd made the donation anonymously through my foundation. Derek was there because Meridian Consulting had bought a table to network with potential clients. I wasn't planning to meet anyone that night. Honestly, I was just trying to get through the evening without too much small talk. At 32, I'd already built and sold a commercial development company, and I was in this weird liminal space where I didn't know what came next. I had more money than I'd ever need, but I didn't have purpose. And I definitely didn't have anyone in my life who saw me as something other than a business opportunity or a potential investor. Derek approached me at the bar. He was handsome in that polished, corporate way, good suit, confident smile, the kind of presence that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. "I don't think we've met," he'd said. Derek Morrison, partner at Meridian Consulting. Sophia Westbridge, I'd replied. He didn't recognize my name, which was actually refreshing. Most people in the business community knew Westbridge Development, even though I'd kept a relatively low profile as its founder. But Derek had no idea. To him, I was just an attractive woman at a charity event. We talked for an hour. He was charming, funny, ambitious. He told me about his career, his goals, his plans to make senior partner before he turned 40. He asked what I did, and when I said I'd recently sold my company, he nodded and said, "That's nice," before launching into a story about a major client he'd just landed. I should have noticed the pattern right then. But I was lonely, and he was charismatic, and it had been a long time since someone had shown interest in me as just a person rather than as Sophia Westbridge, successful entrepreneur. We started dating. In the beginning, it was nice. Derek was attentive, took me to good restaurants, introduced me to his friends. He never asked detailed questions about my company or what I'd sold it for, but I told myself that was because he was giving me space, not wanting to be one of those guys who only cared about my professional success. 6 months in, Derek mentioned that Meridian was hiring for administrative positions. "You should apply," he'd said over dinner. "I mean, if you're looking for something to do. It would be fun to work together." I'd laughed. "You want me to be a secretary at your firm? Why not? You said you're bored. It would give you something to do during the day, and honestly, it would be nice to see you more often." There was something almost sweet about it, in a way. He wasn't suggesting it because he thought it was all I was capable of. He just genuinely seemed to think it would be fun to have me around. And I was bored. The sale of Westbridge Development had left me with nothing but time and investment portfolios to manage. So I applied. Under my maiden name, Sophia Westbridge, instead of using Derek's last name, which I wouldn't have anyway since we weren't married yet. I didn't mention that I was dating Derek Morrison. I just went through the normal interview process, and I got hired based on my administrative skills and my college degree. Derek thought it was hilarious. "My girlfriend is my secretary," he'd joke to his colleagues. How cliché is that? I started noticing things pretty quickly once I was inside Meridian. The way Derek and the other partners talked about the support staff. The assumption that administrative employees were interchangeable and not particularly bright. The casual dismissiveness. But I also started seeing the business itself. The client relationships, the project management, the office politics. I was in a position where I heard everything and was noticed by no one. Executives would have entire confidential conversations right in front of me, as if I was a piece of furniture. Derek proposed 8 months after we started dating. It was romantic, dinner at an expensive restaurant, a beautiful ring, a whole speech about building a future together. I said yes because I loved him, or at least I loved the version of him I'd built in my head. We got married in a small ceremony. Derek wanted something bigger, but I convinced him that intimate was more meaningful. The truth was, I didn't want to explain to a bunch of wedding guests why the successful entrepreneur was marrying a guy who introduced her as his secretary. The shift happened gradually after the wedding. Derek started making little jokes about my job. "My wife answers phones for a living," he'd say at parties, with this affectionate laugh that made it seem charming instead of condescending. "She's not into all this complex business stuff. She's more of a people person." I started making myself smaller in social situations. Not contributing to conversations about business strategy, even when I had relevant experience. Smiling and nodding when Derek's colleagues made assumptions about my capabilities. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. It was more like an instinctive response to an environment that didn't want me to take up space. But somewhere around the 1-year anniversary of our marriage, I realized something. The invisibility I'd cultivated could actually be useful. The building came up for sale 2 years into my marriage. I saw the listing on a Tuesday morning while I was supposedly filing documents in Derek's office. I'd been managing my investment portfolio quietly, meeting with my financial advisor once a month over lunch breaks that Derek thought I spent shopping or getting my nails done. The property was a 43-story Class A office tower in the central business district. Prime location, well-maintained, 92% occupied. The owner was a real estate investment trust that was liquidating assets to restructure their portfolio. They wanted a fast, clean sale. Cash buyer preferred. I called Patricia Vance, my estate attorney, from the parking garage. "I want to look at a property," I told her. Patricia had been handling my legal matters since I sold Westbridge Development. She was one of the few people who knew exactly how much money I actually had, and she'd never once treated me differently because of it. "What kind of property?" "A 43-story office building downtown." There was a pause. "That's a significant acquisition, Sophia. May I ask why?" I'd thought about that question. The honest answer was complicated. Part of it was that I missed the real estate business. I'd built Westbridge Development from nothing, and selling it had left a void that answering phones and organizing Derek's calendar wasn't filling. But there was another part, too. A part that was tired of being invisible. Tired of watching Derek and his colleagues talk about commercial real estate like it was some mysterious art form that only they could understand. Because I'm bored, I said. And because I'm good at this. Patricia set up the viewing for that Friday. I told Derek I was going to visit my college roommate in Portland for the weekend. He barely looked up from his laptop when I mentioned it. Have fun, honey. Bring me back some of those artisan chocolates you got last time. I met Patricia at the building at 9 in the morning. Robert Martinez, the property manager, gave us the full tour. 43 floors of premium office space. State-of-the-art infrastructure. Long-term tenants with solid payment histories. And right there on the tenant list, on floors 38 through 42, Meridian Consulting. I felt something click into place when I saw that. Derek's firm was leasing 5 floors in this building. Had been for years, since before I even met him. He'd mentioned the building before, complained about the rent being high, joked about the faceless corporation that owned it and probably never even visited the property. The asking price is $38 million, Robert was saying. But the sellers are motivated. They want to close within 60 days. A cash offer of $31 or $32 million would probably be accepted. Patricia looked at me. This is a sound investment, she said carefully. The rental income alone would provide excellent returns. But I want to make sure you're thinking clearly about the implications. What implications? Your husband works in this building, Sophia. His entire firm leases space here. If you become their landlord without disclosing it. I'm not planning to disclose it, I said. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. May I ask why not? I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city. From up here, everything looked small and manageable. Organized. Like pieces on a board game that you could move around however you wanted. Because Derek thinks I'm incapable of understanding commercial real estate, I said. He thinks I'm too simple to grasp complex business concepts. He makes jokes about it at dinner parties. His colleagues smile and nod along because they all think the same thing. That I'm decorative. That my job answering phones is the absolute limit of my professional capability. And you want to prove them wrong. No, I said. I want to be right without them knowing. I want to own the building they work in and manage my investment portfolio and make more money in a year than Derek makes in a decade, all while he thinks I'm just his pretty secretary wife who doesn't understand how the world works. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. That's a very specific kind of revenge, Sophia. It's not revenge, I said. It's clarity. I want to see how long it takes for him to notice. How long I can be completely invisible while holding all the power. I spent the next week doing my due diligence. My financial advisor, a sharp woman named Helen Park who'd helped me structure the sale of Westbridge Development, reviewed all the numbers. The building was generating solid returns. The tenant mix was stable. The infrastructure was well maintained. Even with the cash purchase, I'd still have substantial liquid reserves and my other investment income. This is a good acquisition, Helen said during our meeting. Conservative, even. The building practically runs itself, and Robert Martinez has an excellent reputation as a property manager. But Sophia, I have to ask, are you buying this because it's a good investment, or because your husband works there? Both, I said honestly. It's a sound financial decision that also happens to give me some personal satisfaction. Helen nodded slowly. Just make sure the personal satisfaction doesn't cloud your business judgment. It won't. We structured the purchase through a trust. The Westbridge Property Trust, with me as the sole beneficiary but with Patricia as the trustee of record. On paper, the ownership was buried under enough legal entities that casual investigation wouldn't reveal my name. Robert Martinez would continue managing the property, reporting to Patricia, who reported to me. The negotiation took 3 weeks. I offered $31 million cash with a 45-day closing. The sellers accepted within 24 hours. They were desperate for liquidity and didn't want to quibble over price when I was offering clean, fast money. The sale closed 6 weeks later. I signed the papers in Patricia's office on a Thursday afternoon. Derek thought I was at a doctor's appointment. That evening, I came home and made dinner. Derek arrived around 7, loosened his tie, and kissed me on the cheek. "How was your day, honey?" "Fine," I said. "Quiet." "How was yours?" "Exhausting." We had this whole meeting about the office lease renewal. The building owner is apparently considering raising the rent, which is insane given what we already pay. I swear, these property investment groups are just greedy. They don't care about long-term tenant relationships. I stirred the pasta sauce and kept my voice casual. "That does sound frustrating." "Yeah, well, that's business." "Hey, did you pick up my dry cleaning?" "It's hanging in the closet." "You're the best." He grabbed a beer from the fridge and headed to the living room to watch television. I stood in the kitchen, stirring sauce, thinking about the fact that I now owned the building Derek worked in. That his rent checks were, indirectly, coming to me. That every complaint he made about the greedy property owner was about me. And he had absolutely no idea. Living with a secret that big changes you in ways you don't expect. Not all at once, but gradually, like water wearing down stone. I'd wake up in the morning and watch Derek get ready for work, complaining about his commute or his difficult clients or the building management's slow response to maintenance requests. I'd nod sympathetically while mentally making a note to talk to Robert Martinez about whatever issue Derek had mentioned. By the time Derek arrived at his office, the problem would mysteriously be resolved, and he'd never make the connection. The building became my secret project. Once a month, I'd tell Derek I was meeting a friend for lunch, and instead I'd meet with Robert to review financials, discuss tenant concerns, plan upgrades and improvements. Robert was professional and discreet. He never asked why I wanted to keep my ownership quiet, and I appreciated that about him. Meridian Consulting is requesting an additional conference room on the 41st floor, Robert told me during one of our meetings, about 8 months after I'd purchased the property. They're willing to pay for the build-out, but they want a 5-year lease extension in exchange. What are the current market rates for comparable space? I asked. Robert showed me the analysis. I approved the expansion but negotiated terms that were favorable to me while still seeming reasonable to Meridian. Derek came home that night thrilled about the deal he'd helped secure. I really pushed hard in that negotiation, he told me over dinner. The building owner was trying to squeeze us, but I stood firm. Saved the company probably $50,000 a year. I smiled and congratulated him, not mentioning that I'd actually increased the rent by 3%, which he hadn't even noticed because I'd structured it into the expansion agreement. 2 weeks after buying the building, Derek came home complaining that the elevator on floor 41 had been broken for 3 days. "It's ridiculous," he said. "We're paying premium rent, and they can't even keep the elevators working." I sent 3 emails to building management and got nothing but automated responses. The next morning, while Derek was in the shower, I texted Robert, "The elevator issue on 41, priority repair today. And improve response time on tenant communications." By noon, the elevator was fixed. Derek came home that evening looking slightly puzzled. "Weirdest thing, that elevator finally got repaired today. Like, within hours of me complaining about it at the morning meeting. Maybe someone important finally noticed." "Maybe," I said, hiding my smile behind my wine glass. The dynamic at work became almost surreal. I'd sit at my desk outside Derek's office, answering phones and scheduling meetings, while simultaneously managing a multi-million-dollar property. I'd be typing up Derek's correspondence while listening to him complain about building maintenance. I'd file his expense reports while reviewing lease agreements that his firm was paying me. The other executives at Meridian treated me exactly the way Derek did, polite but dismissive. I was furniture. Useful furniture, but furniture nonetheless. They'd have entire confidential conversations right in front of me about client strategies, internal politics, financial projections. They discussed Meridian's business challenges and growth plans while I organized files 3 feet away, completely invisible to them. But I was learning everything. The company's strengths and weaknesses. Which executives were competent and which ones were coasting on relationships. Where the real power lay versus where the title suggested it should be. I was getting a graduate-level education in corporate dynamics, and nobody even realized I was paying attention. Derek's career was advancing. 18 months into my ownership of the building, he made senior partner. There was a celebration dinner where he gave a speech thanking his mentors and colleagues. He thanked me too, in that affectionate, condescending way he'd perfected. And of course, my wife Sophia, who keeps my life organized so I can focus on the important stuff. Everyone applauded. I smiled. What Derek didn't know was that I'd been the one who ensured Meridian got preferential treatment when a premium suite became available on the 42nd floor, the one with the best views, the one that helped them land a major client who was impressed by their prestigious office space. Derek thought it was luck and good timing. It was actually me, quietly pulling strings that no one knew existed. The money from the building was significant. After expenses and Robert's management fees, I was clearing about $2 million a year in rental income. That money went into investment accounts Derek didn't know about. I'd never combined our finances completely. We had a joint checking account for household expenses, but I'd kept my primary assets separate, which Derek had never questioned because he assumed I didn't have significant assets to manage. Sometimes I'd be sitting at my desk, listening to Derek and the other partners talk about someone's investment property or stock portfolio, and I'd think about the fact that my net worth was probably higher than all of theirs combined. And none of them had any idea. The closest I came to being discovered was when Amanda from accounting asked me about my maiden name. I was processing some old HR files and saw you applied as Sophia Westbridge. Are you related to Westbridge Development by any chance? My heart stopped for a second. But I kept my voice casual. Distant relation. My great-uncle started the company, but we're not close. Oh, okay. I was just curious. She never brought it up again, and I made a mental note to be more careful. Derek never asked questions. Not about my family, my past, my finances, my education. He knew I had a business degree from somewhere. He'd never asked where. He knew I'd worked before we met. He'd never asked doing what. His understanding of me was so surface level that it would have been depressing if it wasn't so useful. Because every time he dismissed me, every time he made a joke about my simple little secretary job, every time he explained something to me that I already understood better than he did, I'd think about the building. About the fact that he was literally working in a space that I owned. That his company's lease payments were funding my investment portfolio. That the professional success he was so proud of was happening in an environment I controlled. And I'd smile. 2 years into owning the building, Derek started talking about the upcoming lease renewal. Meridian's current lease was set to expire in 18 months, and the partners were already strategizing about negotiations. We need to be aggressive, Derek said one night. These building owners think they can just keep raising rent indefinitely. We should push for a rate decrease. We're model tenants. We deserve better terms. I said, not looking up from my book. That's when I started planning. Not planning to reveal myself, exactly. More like planning for the possibility. I asked Patricia to prepare documentation I could use if the moment ever came. I reviewed the lease terms with extra care. I made sure Robert had all the current market data that would support my position if negotiations got contentious. Are you expecting trouble? Patricia asked during one of our meetings. I'm expecting Derek to underestimate me, I said. Again. And I want to be ready when he does. The turning point came on a Wednesday morning in early September. Derek had been preparing for a major presentation to the Meridian partners about the lease renewal strategy. He'd spent weeks putting together analysis, market comparisons, negotiation tactics. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m, and he'd been practicing his talking points all week. That morning, he asked me to prepare the conference room. Make sure everything's perfect, he said. Full coffee service, water, those good pastries from the bakery on 5th Street. This presentation needs to go flawlessly. Of course, I said. I spent the morning setting up. The conference room looked immaculate, fresh flowers, premium refreshments, all the technology tested and working. I'd even printed backup copies of Derek's presentation materials, because I'd learned over 4 years that he frequently forgot details like that. At 1:30, the partners started arriving. James Cardwell, Marcus Rivera, Amanda, Connor Sheffield, a few others. Derek was in his element, shaking hands, making confident small talk. He barely glanced at me as I arranged coffee cups and napkins. "Gentlemen, ladies," James said as everyone settled into their seats. "Derek has put together a comprehensive analysis of our lease situation. Derek, the floor is yours." Derek stood, clicked to his first slide, and launched into his presentation. I stood near the back wall, next to the refreshment cart, exactly where Derek had positioned me that morning. His presentation was actually quite good. He'd done his homework on market rates, occupancy trends, comparable properties. He showed data proving that Meridian was paying above market rates for their space. He outlined a negotiation strategy that involved leveraging their history as reliable tenants and threatening to relocate if necessary. Except his data was wrong. I could see it from where I was standing. He was using occupancy figures from 6 months ago, when the building had been going through a minor vacancy issue on some of the lower floors. Current occupancy was 96%, which completely undermined his argument about the owner being desperate for tenants. "The building owner has us over a barrel because they know relocation is expensive and disruptive," Derek said, warming to his argument. "But we need to call their bluff. Show them we're willing to walk away. These property investment groups are all the same, they care about cash flow more than anything. Threaten that cash flow, and suddenly they become very reasonable." Marcus nodded approvingly. "What kind of rate reduction are we targeting?" "I think we can get 15%, Derek said confidently. "Maybe 20 if we negotiate hard enough. This building has been having vacancy issues on some of the lower floors. They need us more than we need them." I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just Derek being casually dismissive anymore. This was Derek actively planning to leverage false information to negotiate against me. To reduce rent based on data that was completely outdated and inaccurate. And he was doing it while I stood 3 feet away, invisible and dismissed, expected to pour coffee and stay quiet. "What about the owner's position?" Amanda asked. "Have we done any research on the investment group that owns the property? Understanding their financial situation could give us leverage." "The ownership is buried in some trust structure," Derek said dismissively. "Probably some overseas investors who've never even seen the building. That's actually good for us. Absentee owners are easier to pressure because they don't have emotional attachment to the property." James looked thoughtful. "Still, it might be worth trying to identify the actual owners. Information is power in any negotiation." "With all due respect, James, I don't think that's necessary," Derek said. "We're overthinking this. It's a simple leverage play. We're valuable tenants, we deserve better rates, and if they won't negotiate, we walk. The owner will cave." My heart was pounding. My hands were steady. This was it. 4 years of invisible power, ending in one moment of complete visibility. That's when I spoke up. "The building owner might not be as willing to negotiate as you think." The room went quiet. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Derek's expression flickered with irritation. "Sophia, we're in the middle of a presentation." "I know. I'm just saying that your market analysis is based on Q2 data. The current occupancy rate is actually 96%, not the 87% your slides show. That changes the leverage equation significantly." Marcus leaned forward. "How do you know the current occupancy rate?" I hesitated for just a second. This was the moment. I could back down, apologize for interrupting, go back to being invisible. Or I could keep going. "I pay attention to commercial real estate trends," I said simply. Derek actually laughed. Sophia, honey, you're a secretary. You answer phones. You don't understand commercial real estate market analysis. I understand it better than you think. This is ridiculous, Derek said, turning back to the partners. I apologize for the interruption. As I was saying, our negotiation strategy should focus on. You're going to offer them a 15% rent decrease, I said, my voice stronger now. Based on faulty data. They're going to reject it immediately. Then you're going to threaten to relocate, which will cost Meridian approximately $800,000 in moving expenses, lost productivity, and lease termination penalties. The building owner knows this, which means your threat has no credibility. Derek's face was reddening. Sophia, that's enough. You don't know what you're talking about. Actually, I do. I also know that comparable Class A office space in this area is currently leasing for 12 to 15% more than what Meridian is paying. So if anything, you should be expecting a rent increase, not a decrease. James was watching me with new interest. Where are you getting these numbers, Sophia? This was it. The decision point. I could feel my heart racing, but my voice stayed calm. From the property owner, I said. The room went completely silent. Derek stared at me. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you're all planning to negotiate with someone you've never bothered to actually investigate. You've made assumptions about who owns this building and what their position is. All of those assumptions are wrong. Derek was standing now, his body language shifting from confident to defensive. Sophia, I don't know what you think you know, but this is a complex business negotiation that involves me, I interrupted. Directly involves me. I walked to my position at the back wall and picked up the leather portfolio I'd brought into the meeting. I'd prepared it last night, after Derek had fallen asleep. Inside were copies of the trust documents, the property deed, 2 years of financial statements, and a formal notice of lease renewal terms. I walked to the conference table and placed the portfolio in front of James Cardwell. What is this? James asked. Documentation proving that I own this building, I said. Through the Westbridge Property Trust, which I established 2 years ago when I purchased the property for $31 million. Meridian Consulting has been leasing space in this building for 7 years total. I've been the owner for the past 2 years. The silence that followed was extraordinary. It wasn't just quiet, it was like someone had hit a pause button on reality itself. Everyone frozen, processing information that didn't match anything they thought they knew. Derek's mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. His face had gone from red to pale in about 3 seconds. James opened the portfolio with hands that weren't quite steady. He pulled out the first document, the property deed with my name clearly listed as owner through the trust. His eyes scanned the page, and I watched his expression change from skepticism to confusion to something like shock. This appears to be authentic, he said quietly. It is authentic, I replied. You can verify it with Patricia Vance at Coastal Trust and Estate, or with Robert Martinez at Prestige Property Management. Robert has been managing the building on my behalf for 2 years. He can confirm every detail. Marcus had stood up and was looking over James's shoulder at the documents. The acquisition date is September 2022. He looked up at me. That's 2 years into your marriage. Yes. I was working here when I made the purchase. Amanda's voice was almost a whisper. You've been our landlord for 2 years? Yes. Derek finally found his voice. This is insane. This is some kind of fraud or forgery or, Sophia, where would you even get $31 million? You're a secretary. You make less than $60,000 a year. I make $52,000 a year from Meridian, I said calmly. But that's not my only income. I also collect approximately $2.3 million annually in net rental income from this property. Plus returns on my other investments. The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. Marcus was asking rapid questions about the trust structure. Connor was saying something about conflict of interest. Amanda had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. But I was watching Derek. His face was cycling through emotions so quickly I could barely track them. Denial, confusion, anger, fear, humiliation. He looked like a man watching his entire understanding of reality disintegrate in real time. "This doesn't make sense," he said, his voice cracking slightly. You never said anything about owning property or having money or." "You never asked," I said simply. "In 5 years of knowing me, you never once asked about my background, my education, my career before we met, my finances, or my plans for the future. You assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be, a secretary with a simple job and no other ambitions or capabilities." James had pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Robert Martinez right now." "Please do," I said. While James made the call, stepping slightly away from the table, the rest of the room sat in stunned silence. I stayed standing, my hands relaxed at my sides, watching them all process. Derek was shaking his head like he could physically reject the information. "But you work here. You answer my phone. You schedule my appointments. Why would you do that if you owned a $43 million building?" $43 million is the current valuation, yes. The property value has appreciated. I paused. "And I did it because I wanted to understand your world. I wanted to see how this company operated from the inside. How you and your colleagues thought. How you made decisions. By pretending to be something you're not." "I never pretended to be anything," I said. "I took a job I was qualified for and performed it well. You're the one who assumed that answering phones was the limit of my capability. You decided I was too simple to understand complex business concepts. You made me into someone small and decorative because that's what was comfortable for you." James returned to the table, his face pale. Robert Martinez confirmed everything. The ownership, the trust structure, the management agreement. Sophia Westbridge is the owner of this property and has been for 2 years. It's all legitimate. Marcus was staring at the financial statements now. According to these documents, the building generates over $4 million in annual gross revenue. Net income after expenses is, he looked up at me. "You're clearing more than $2 million a year from this property alone?" "Yes." Derek made a sound that was almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "So when I've been coming home complaining about the building owner raising rent or being difficult about maintenance requests, I've been complaining too. To me," I finished. "Yes. Every complaint you made about the greedy, faceless property owner was about me. Every time you said I should learn about business from you, you were working in a building I owned. Every joke you made about me being just a secretary was said in an office that exists because I allow it to." The weight of that statement settled over the room like a physical presence. Connor cleared his throat. "So, about the lease renewal negotiations." I smiled. "Yes, let's talk about that. Your current lease expires in 90 days. I'm prepared to offer a renewal, but not at the terms Derek was planning to propose." Derek's voice was hollow. "What terms?" "A 20% increase in rent," I said calmly. "Which brings you to current market rate for comparable Class A space. The terms are outlined in the documents I've provided. You have 30 days to accept or decline." James was flipping through the renewal proposal. "This is, Sophia, a 20% increase is substantial." "It's market rate," I said. "Actually, it's slightly below market rate for this quality of space in this location. I've included comparable lease data in the appendix. You're welcome to verify it independently." Marcus was already doing the math on his phone. "She's right. I'm pulling current listings for Class A office space downtown. We'd be paying 15 to 18% more anywhere else, and we'd have to factor in moving costs. I'm offering you a 10-year lease with predictable annual escalations tied to the Consumer Price Index," I continued. "That stability and predictability you won't find elsewhere. The terms are fair, James. You know they are." James nodded slowly, his CEO instincts kicking in even through his shock. "I'll need to present this to the board." "Of course. Take the 30 days. Review everything with your legal team and your financial advisors. You'll find that everything is in order and that the terms are reasonable. I paused. But I want to be very clear about one thing: Derek will not be part of these negotiations. That would represent an obvious conflict of interest given our relationship. Agreed, James said immediately. Derek looked like he'd been slapped. You're cutting me out of my own company's lease negotiations? You're cutting yourself out, I said gently. You can't negotiate a lease with your wife. That's not how business works. You know that, Derek. The reality of his situation was finally hitting him. His wife owned his building. His company was her tenant. His colleagues now knew that every condescending comment he'd made about her limited capabilities had been said to someone who owned a $43 million property. And there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. James Cardwell looked like a man who'd just been told the laws of physics had changed. Sophia, I think we need to have a separate conversation about this. A private conversation. Without, he glanced at Derek. Without the full partnership present. I'm happy to meet with you, I said. But Derek won't be part of the lease negotiations regardless. That would be a conflict of interest, given that he's my husband. Derek flinched at that like I'd slapped him. Your husband. Right. The husband you've been lying to for 2 years. I never lied, I said. You never asked. There's a difference. This is semantics, Derek shot back, his voice rising. You let me think, you let everyone think. I let you make assumptions, I interrupted. You assumed that because I worked as a secretary, that must be all I was capable of. You assumed that because I didn't talk about business at home, I must not understand it. You assumed that because I smiled and stayed quiet at company events, I must not have opinions worth hearing. I didn't create those assumptions, Derek. You did. Marcus was still looking at the financial documents, his analytical brain clearly trying to reconcile everything. Westbridge Development, he said suddenly. You said your maiden name was Westbridge. Were you the founder of Westbridge Development? The commercial property firm that sold to Pinnacle Group 7 years ago? Yes. That sale was valued at, Marcus looked up at me, his eyes wide. That sale was valued at over $60 million. The room somehow got even quieter, if that was possible. Amanda was the first to speak. So you've been sitting outside Derek's office for nearly 5 years, answering phones and filing papers, while being worth. I'd rather not discuss my specific net worth, I said. But yes, the sale of Westbridge Development was quite successful. That's where the capital came from to purchase this building. Connor let out a long breath. This is the most insane thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Derek was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Which, in a way, he hadn't. Why? He asked, and his voice had changed, less angry now, more bewildered. Why would you do this? Why work as a secretary when you didn't need the money? Why marry me and not tell me any of this? I worked as a secretary because I wanted to, I said. Because after selling my company, I wasn't sure what to do next, and this seemed interesting. As for why I married you because I loved you. Or at least, I loved the person I thought you were. And now? I looked at him for a long moment. At this man I'd shared a bed with for 4 years. This man who'd introduced me to his colleagues as my wife who doesn't really understand business. This man who'd explained basic economic concepts to me that I'd learned in graduate school. This man who'd never once asked about my life before him. Now I'm not sure what I feel, I said honestly. Except tired. Very tired. James cleared his throat. I think we should end this meeting. Sophia, would you be available to meet tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock? Just you, me, and Marcus to discuss the lease terms in detail? Of course, I said. I'll have Patricia Vance join us. She's my attorney and the trustee on record for the property. That's fine. James was already gathering papers, clearly desperate to escape the overwhelming awkwardness of the situation. Everyone else, let's reconvene Friday morning to discuss next steps. The room began clearing out. Executives filing past me with expressions ranging from shock to curiosity to what might have been respect. Amanda paused as she passed. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I think what you did was kind of brilliant. Then it was just me and Derek in the conference room. He was still sitting at the table, staring at the documents spread out in front of him. The presentation he'd spent weeks preparing was still pulled up on the screen behind him, completely irrelevant now. I need to go, I said. Go where? Home. I'm taking the rest of the day off. You can't just, Sophia, we need to talk about this. We need to. Derek, I just revealed to your entire executive team that I own the building they work in. I'm not interested in having a conversation with you right now about why I didn't tell you. We can talk later. Or not. I honestly don't know what I want anymore. I picked up my handbag and walked toward the door. Sophia, wait. I stopped but didn't turn around. Did you ever love me? His voice was quiet. Or was this whole thing some kind of long-term plan to humiliate me? I turned back to look at him. He looked smaller somehow. Less confident. The polished senior partner facade had cracked, and underneath was just a confused man who'd built his entire self-image on assumptions that had turned out to be false. I loved you, I said. I loved the man I met at that charity gala. The charming, ambitious man who seemed interested in building something together. But that man disappeared somewhere along the way. Or maybe he was never real to begin with. Maybe I just wanted him to be real so badly that I convinced myself he was. And the building? Keeping it secret for 2 years? That wasn't about you initially. It was about me wanting to maintain something that was mine. Something separate from our marriage. But somewhere along the way, after enough jokes about me being too simple to understand business, after enough times being dismissed or talked over or treated like decoration, yes, it became about proving something. Not to you, necessarily. More to myself. That I could be completely invisible and completely powerful at the same time. Derek's phone started buzzing on the table. He glanced at it, probably one of the partners calling, but didn't answer. What happens now? He asked. Now I go home. You deal with your colleagues' questions. Tomorrow I negotiate a lease renewal with your CEO. And after that, I shrugged. I honestly don't know. But Derek? You're not part of the lease negotiations. James made that clear, and I agree. This is business. You need to stay out of it. I left him sitting there alone in the conference room, surrounded by his useless presentation materials and the documents proving his wife owned the building he'd worked in for 5 years without knowing it. I drove home in a daze. The adrenaline from the confrontation was wearing off, leaving behind this strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. My phone started buzzing before I even made it out of the parking garage. Derek calling. I declined. It rang again immediately. Still Derek. I turned the phone to silent and focused on driving. The house was quiet when I arrived. Our house, though I suppose it was mostly mine, given that I'd paid the $250,000 down payment with money Derek didn't know I had. That was another conversation we'd need to have eventually. How much of our life together had been built on his assumptions and my strategic omissions. I changed out of my work clothes into jeans and a sweater, made tea, and sat in the kitchen watching my phone light up with incoming calls and messages. Derek. James. Marcus. Amanda. Even a few numbers I didn't recognize, probably other Meridian employees who'd already heard the news. The news. God. It would be all over the company by now. Derek Morrison's secretary wife secretly owns the building. I could imagine the gossip spreading through floors 38 through 42 like wildfire. The shock, the speculation, the inevitable debates about whether what I'd done was brilliant or deceptive or both. I listened to one voicemail, from James. Sophia, this is James Cardwell. I'd like to move our meeting to this afternoon if you're available. 3 o'clock. I think it's important we discuss the lease situation sooner rather than later, and honestly, there are some other matters regarding your employment at Meridian that we should address. Please call me back. My employment. Right. I was technically still an employee. Derek's secretary. That position was going to be untenable now, obviously. You can't answer phones for your husband after revealing you're wealthier than his entire firm combined. I called Patricia Vance instead of James. She answered on the first ring. I assume something happened, she said. I've had 3 calls from Meridian Consulting in the past hour. I told them, I said. About the building. About everything. There was a pause. How did that go? About as well as you'd expect. Derek looked like I'd told him I was actually an alien. James wants to meet this afternoon to discuss the lease. And probably to figure out what to do about the fact that their senior partner's wife has been their landlord for 2 years without anyone knowing. Do you want me there for the meeting? Yes, please. 3 o'clock. And Patricia? I think I'm done working at Meridian. I don't know if I should resign or wait to be let go or what the protocol is for this kind of situation. Patricia's voice was gentle. There is no protocol for this kind of situation, Sophia. You've created an entirely unprecedented scenario. But yes, I think ending your employment there is probably wise. We can discuss the details this afternoon. The meeting took place in James's private office, not the main conference room. Just James, Marcus, Patricia, and me. The atmosphere was professional but tense, like everyone was trying very hard to pretend this was a normal business meeting and not a complete inversion of every power dynamic they'd assumed existed. James started with the lease. We've reviewed the terms you've proposed. A 20% increase it's significant. It brings you to market rate, I said calmly. Actually, it's still slightly below market rate for comparable Class A space. I'm offering you a discount based on your history as reliable tenants. Marcus had clearly done his homework. I pulled data on 6 comparable properties. She's right. We've actually been paying below market for the past year and a half. The increase she's proposing is fair. James nodded slowly. We'd like to negotiate a longer lease term in exchange for a smaller annual increase. 10 years instead of 5, with a 3% annual escalation instead of market rate adjustments. I looked at Patricia, who nodded slightly. That's acceptable, I said. Patricia will draft the revised terms. Good. James folded his hands on his desk. Now, about your employment here. I'll resign, effective immediately, I said before he could continue. I think we all recognize that the current situation is untenable. I appreciate that. James looked relieved. We'll provide 2 weeks of severance pay, standard protocol. And Sophia, for what it's worth, your work here has always been excellent. You were one of the best administrative employees we've had. Thank you. I do have one question, though. James leaned forward slightly. Did you take this job specifically to gather information about our operations? As the building owner? I'd been expecting this question. No. I took the job nearly 5 years ago, more than 2 years before I bought the building. I applied because I was bored and because Derek suggested it. The purchase came later. But I won't lie, once I owned the property, yes, working here gave me insight into your operations that helped me make better management decisions. Marcus spoke up. Did you ever use confidential information you learned here to make property decisions that benefited you financially at our expense? No, I said firmly. You can review 2 years of lease terms and building management decisions. Everything has been at fair market rate or better. I never exploited my position for financial gain. If anything, I've been more generous with Meridian than I would have been with a tenant I didn't have a personal connection to. That seemed to satisfy them. We spent another 30 minutes working through details, my final paycheck, return of building access credentials, the standard exit procedures. It was surreal, going through HR termination protocols with men who'd watched me serve coffee that morning. As we were finishing, James said, I assume Derek will need to recuse himself from all building-related decisions going forward. That would be appropriate, I agreed. This is going to be complicated for him, Marcus said carefully. Being married to the landlord while working here. Yes, I said. I imagine it will be. What I didn't say was that I wasn't sure Derek and I would still be married in 6 months. That conversation was coming, but not today. Today I'd already dismantled enough of the life we'd built on false assumptions. I left Meridian Consulting that afternoon for the last time as an employee. Walked through the lobby where I'd entered every morning for nearly 5 years, past the security desk where guards had smiled and waved at Mr. Morrison's wife, into the elevator that would take me down to street level. Except now they all knew. The security guards, the reception staff, probably everyone in the building by now. That quiet secretary on the 41st floor? She owned the whole damn place. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and looked up at the 43 stories of glass and steel rising above me. My building. My investment. My secret that wasn't secret anymore. And honestly, I felt lighter than I had in years. 3 months passed. The lease renewal with Meridian was finalized in October. 20% increase, 10-year term, standard market rate escalations. James signed the documents in Patricia's office with Marcus present. Professional, cordial, completely businesslike. No mention of Derek except in the conflict of interest disclosure that confirmed he'd recused himself from all negotiations. Derek and I separated officially in November. He moved into a downtown apartment, not in my building, thankfully. We'd had several more conversations, each one a little less painful than the last, until we finally arrived at the same conclusion. We'd built a marriage on a foundation that had never been solid, and there was no going back to pretending it was. The divorce papers were filed in early December. Uncontested, no fault. We'd agreed on terms surprisingly quickly. I kept the house, Derek kept his 401k and his car, we split some minor joint assets. No alimony in either direction. Clean, simple, over. I'd expected to feel sad about it, but mostly I just felt relieved. Like I'd been holding my breath for 4 years and could finally exhale. The building became my focus. Not obsessively, but healthily. I started meeting with Robert Martinez weekly instead of monthly, getting more involved in the actual management decisions. I approved a renovation of the lobby that had been needed for years. I negotiated a new contract with the janitorial service that improved working conditions and wages for the cleaning staff. I even started coming to the building regularly, not hiding anymore. The first time I walked through the lobby as the acknowledged owner rather than as Derek's secretary wife felt surreal. The security guards who'd waved at me for years now stood a little straighter, greeted me more formally. "Good morning, Ms. Westbridge." It took some getting used to. I ran into Amanda in January, completely by chance, at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the building. She was in line ahead of me and turned around as I was ordering. "Sophia," she said, and I couldn't quite read her expression. "Hi." "Hi, Amanda." Awkward silence. Then she gestured to a table. "Do you have a few minutes? I'd really like to talk to you, if that's okay." We sat with our coffees. Amanda stirred sugar into hers for longer than necessary, clearly trying to figure out what to say. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. "For what?" "For laughing. At that dinner party last year, when Derek made that joke about you not understanding investment portfolios. I laughed along with everyone else. And there were other times, too. Times when the partners would make comments about the support staff being not the brightest, and I just went along with it because I wanted to fit in." "Amanda, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Because you were right there, hearing all of it. And you were smarter than all of us combined, and we treated you like you were invisible. Like you didn't matter." I took a sip of my coffee. "I let you treat me that way. I could have said something at any point. But you shouldn't have had to. That's what I've been thinking about for the past 3 months. You shouldn't have had to prove your worth for people to treat you with basic respect." We sat quietly for a moment. Then Amanda smiled slightly. Although I have to say, the way you revealed it was pretty spectacular. Derek's face when you said you owned the building, I've never seen anyone look so completely shocked. I couldn't help laughing. It wasn't my finest moment, probably. Very dramatic. It was perfect, Amanda said. Sometimes men like Derek need to be hit over the head with reality because they're too wrapped up in their own assumptions to notice it otherwise. How is he doing? At work, I mean. Professional. Quiet. He doesn't make jokes anymore, if that tells you anything. I think the whole thing really shook him. Marcus told me Derek asked to be transferred to a different project team because the dynamic with everyone who was in that meeting was too awkward. That's probably smart. Are you too? Divorcing. It'll be final in a few months. Amanda nodded. I'm sorry. Even though it seems like the right choice, it still must be hard. It is and it isn't, I said honestly. Mostly it just feels like closing a chapter that should have ended a while ago. We talked for another 20 minutes. Amanda told me about her own career frustrations at Meridian, how she was thinking about looking for opportunities elsewhere. I found myself giving her advice, making connections, being the kind of mentor I wish I'd had at her age. As we were leaving, Amanda said, "You know what the weirdest part is? Everyone at Meridian talks about you differently now. With respect. Like you're a real person instead of just Derek's wife." It shouldn't have taken a dramatic reveal for that to happen, but it did. People see what they're prepared to see, I said. I spent years being what they expected. Now they don't have a choice but to see something different. I started having lunch with Patricia once a week. Not always to discuss business, sometimes just to talk. She'd become more than my attorney over the years. She was one of the few people who'd known the truth all along and never treated me differently because of it. You seem lighter, she observed one day in February, over salads at a place near her office. I feel lighter, I admitted. Like I've been carrying around this secret for so long that I forgot it was heavy. Now that it's out, I can just be. What's next for you? Patricia asked. Another business venture? More real estate acquisitions? Maybe. I've been thinking about it. But I'm also thinking about just taking time to figure out who I am when I'm not hiding or performing or playing a role. That sounds healthy. It feels healthy. The building continued to thrive. Tenant satisfaction scores were the highest they'd been in years. We'd filled the few remaining vacancies with quality tenants. The renovations I'd approved were making a visible difference in the property's appeal. Robert Martinez sent me a note in March. "Just wanted to let you know, 3 tenants have approached me about expanding their leases in the past month. Word is getting around that this is a well-managed property with a responsive owner. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I smiled when I read that. For 2 years, I'd been managing this property in secret, making decisions that no one knew came from me. Now I was doing it openly, and the results spoke for themselves. I wasn't hiding anymore. And the world hadn't ended. If anything, things were better. Derek didn't come home that night after the revelation. He texted around 8, staying at Connor's place. Need time to think. I didn't respond. Part of me was relieved. The house felt peaceful without his presence, without the weight of pretending everything was normal when everything had fundamentally changed. He showed up Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard his key in the lock. He looked terrible, rumpled clothes, dark circles under his eyes, hair uncombed. Like he'd spent the night drinking and not sleeping, which he probably had. "We need to talk," he said. "Okay." He sat at the kitchen table, and I poured 2 cups of coffee. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, this married couple who'd shared this space for 4 years but apparently had never really known each other at all. "I've been going over everything in my head," Derek said finally. "Trying to understand when this all started. When you decided to do whatever this is. It's not a conspiracy, Derek. I bought a building. That's all." "That's all?" His voice rose slightly. Sophia, you bought the building where I work. You became my landlord. And you never said a word. For 2 years. You're right. I didn't tell you. Why? I sipped my coffee, thinking about how to answer that. At first, it really was just about privacy. I wanted to keep something separate from our marriage. Something that was mine. You never asked about my finances, and I didn't volunteer the information. But 2 years, Sophia. 2 years of listening to me complain about the building owner. 2 years of watching me prepare for lease negotiations. You could have said something at any point. I could have, I agreed. But Derek, you also could have asked. In 5 years of knowing me, you never once asked about my life before you. Never asked about my career, my education, my family background. You made assumptions, and I let you keep those assumptions. Because you were testing me, he said bitterly. Seeing how long it would take for me to notice that my wife was secretly rich. No. I was just living my life. You're the one who decided I was too simple to understand business. You're the one who made jokes about me being just a secretary at dinner parties. You created an entire identity for me based on nothing but your own assumptions. Derek was quiet for a long moment. The guys at work are saying I must have known. That there's no way I could be married to you and not know you owned a 43-story building. What do you tell them? That I'm an idiot who never paid attention to his own wife. The honesty of that statement surprised me. I'd expected defensiveness, justification. Instead, he just looked defeated. I talked to my mom yesterday, he continued. Told her everything. You know what she said? I shook my head. She said she always thought you were too smart for the role you were playing. That she wondered why someone with your education and presence was content to just be someone's secretary. She asked me once, early in our marriage, what you did before we met. I told her I didn't know. She looked at me like I was crazy. I just shrugged it off. Figured it didn't matter. Your mom is perceptive. Yeah. Derek rubbed his face with both hands. God, Sophia. How did I miss this? How did I spend 4 years married to you and not see any of it? Because you didn't want to see it, I said gently. You liked the version of me that you'd created. The supportive wife with the simple job who made your life easier and never challenged you. Seeing the real me would have required you to rethink your entire worldview. And now I don't have a choice. No. Now you don't. He looked around our kitchen, the expensive appliances, the custom cabinets, the marble countertops. Did you pay for this house? Our house? I paid the down payment. We split the mortgage payments, like we agreed. But the down payment was what, $200,000? $250. Jesus. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I thought I was being generous by agreeing to put your name on the deed even though I made more money. I thought I was being a good husband by letting you contribute equally to the mortgage. You were very magnanimous, I said, and couldn't quite keep the edge out of my voice. Derek caught it. You resent me. I don't know what I feel, Derek. That's the truth. I'm angry, yes. At you for never seeing me. At myself for letting it go on so long. But mostly I'm just tired. Do you want a divorce? The question hung in the air between us. I'd been expecting it, but hearing it out loud still felt significant. I don't know, I said honestly. Do you? I don't know either. My wife is a stranger. I don't know how to be married to someone I don't actually know. You could try getting to know me, I suggested. For real this time. Ask questions. Listen to the answers. See me as an actual person instead of a supporting character in your life story. Derek was quiet for a long time. I don't know if I can do that, he finally said. I don't know if my ego can handle being married to someone more successful than me. Is that terrible to admit? It's honest, I said. More honest than you've been with me in a long time. What happens now? I thought about that. About this man sitting across from me who I'd loved once, maybe still loved in some complicated way. This man who'd never seen me clearly but was at least finally admitting that fact. Now we figure out what we actually want, I said. Not what we thought we wanted when we got married based on incomplete information. What we actually want now, knowing the truth. And if what we want is different things? Then we end this, I said. Cleanly. Fairly. Like adults. Derek nodded slowly. Then he stood up. I'm going to stay at Connor's for a while longer. Give us both space to think. Okay. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Sophia, I never meant to make you feel invisible. I just didn't know how to see you. I know, I said. And that was somehow the saddest part of all. 3 months passed. The lease renewal with Meridian was finalized in October. 20% increase, 10-year term, standard market rate escalations. James signed the documents in Patricia's office with Marcus present. Professional, cordial, completely businesslike. No mention of Derek except in the conflict of interest disclosure that confirmed he'd recused himself from all negotiations. Derek and I separated officially in November. He moved into a downtown apartment, not in my building, thankfully. We'd had several more conversations, each one a little less painful than the last, until we finally arrived at the same conclusion. We'd built a marriage on a foundation that had never been solid, and there was no going back to pretending it was. The divorce papers were filed in early December. Uncontested, no fault. We'd agreed on terms surprisingly quickly. I kept the house, Derek kept his 401k and his car, we split some minor joint assets. No alimony in either direction. Clean, simple, over. I'd expected to feel sad about it, but mostly I just felt relieved. Like I'd been holding my breath for 4 years and could finally exhale. The building became my focus. Not obsessively, but healthily. I started meeting with Robert Martinez weekly instead of monthly, getting more involved in the actual management decisions. I approved a renovation of the lobby that had been needed for years. I negotiated a new contract with the janitorial service that improved working conditions for the cleaning staff. I even started coming to the building regularly, not hiding anymore. The first time I walked through the lobby as the acknowledged owner rather than as Derek's secretary wife felt surreal. The security guards who'd waved at me for years now stood a little straighter, greeted me more formally. Good morning, Ms. Westbridge. It took some getting used to. I ran into Amanda in January, completely by chance, at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the building. She was in line ahead of me and turned around as I was ordering. Sophia, she said, and I couldn't quite read her expression. Hi. Hi, Amanda. Awkward silence. Then she gestured to a table. Do you have a few minutes? I'd really like to talk to you, if that's okay. We sat with our coffees. Amanda stirred sugar into hers for longer than necessary, clearly trying to figure out what to say. I owe you an apology, she finally said. For what? For laughing. At that party last year, when Derek made that joke about you not understanding commercial leases. I laughed along with everyone else. And there were other times, too. Times when the partners would make comments about the support staff, and I just went along with it because I wanted to fit in. Amanda, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Because you were right there, hearing all of it. And you were smarter than all of us combined, and we treated you like you were invisible. Like you didn't matter. I took a sip of my coffee. I let you treat me that way. I could have said something at any point. But you shouldn't have had to. That's what I've been thinking about for the past 3 months. You shouldn't have had to prove your worth for people to treat you with basic respect. We sat quietly for a moment. Then Amanda smiled slightly. Although I have to say, the way you revealed it was pretty spectacular. Derek's face when you said you owned the building, I've never seen anyone look so completely poleaxed. I couldn't help laughing. It wasn't my finest moment, probably. Very dramatic. It was perfect, Amanda said. Sometimes men like Derek need to be hit over the head with reality because they're too wrapped up in their own assumptions to notice it otherwise. How is he doing? At work, I mean. Professional. Quiet. He doesn't make jokes anymore, if that tells you anything. I think the whole thing really shook him. Marcus told me Derek asked to be transferred to a different project team because the dynamic with everyone who was in that meeting was too awkward. That's probably smart. Are you too? Divorcing. It'll be final in a few months. Amanda nodded. I'm sorry. Even though it seems like the right choice, it still must be hard. It is and it isn't, I said honestly. Mostly it just feels like closing a chapter that should have ended a while ago. We talked for another 20 minutes. Amanda told me about her own career frustrations at Meridian, how she was thinking about looking for opportunities elsewhere. I found myself giving her advice, making connections, being the kind of mentor I wish I'd had at her age. As we were leaving, Amanda said, "You know what the weirdest part is? Everyone at Meridian talks about you differently now. With respect. Like you're a real person instead of just Derek's wife." It shouldn't have taken a dramatic reveal for that to happen, but it did. People see what they're prepared to see, I said. I spent years being what they expected. Now they don't have a choice but to see something different. I started having lunch with Patricia once a week. Not always to discuss business, sometimes just to talk. She'd become more than my attorney over the years. She was one of the few people who'd known the truth all along and never treated me differently because of it. You seem lighter, she observed one day in February, over salads at a place near her office. I feel lighter, I admitted. Like I'd been carrying around this secret for so long that I forgot it was heavy. Now that it's out, I can just be. What's next for you? Patricia asked. Another business venture? More real estate acquisitions? Maybe. I've been thinking about it. But I'm also thinking about just taking time to figure out who I am when I'm not hiding or performing or playing a role. That sounds healthy. It feels healthy. I started exploring possibilities. Not rushing into anything, but allowing myself to be curious again. I met with Helen Park, my financial advisor, to discuss potential investments. I had coffee with former colleagues from Westbridge Development who were starting new ventures. I even considered going back to school for a graduate degree in something completely different, urban planning, maybe, or sustainable architecture. The building continued to thrive under my more visible ownership. Tenant satisfaction was at an all-time high. The renovations were attracting attention from commercial brokers who were placing new clients. Robert sent me quarterly reports that showed consistent improvement across every metric. In March, I ran into Derek one more time. Completely by chance, at a coffee shop near what used to be our house. He was sitting by the window with his laptop, dressed casually, looking less polished than he had during our marriage but somehow more authentic. I could have left without him seeing me, but something made me approach his table. "Derek," I said quietly. He looked up, surprise crossing his face before settling into something more complicated. "Sophia." "Hi. I just wanted to say that I hope you're doing well," I said. "I know the past few months have been difficult." He was quiet for a moment, then gestured to the empty chair. "Do you have a minute?" I sat. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "About everything. About who I was and who I want to be." He paused. "I started therapy, actually. My therapist has been helping me understand some things about myself that I'd been avoiding for a long time." "That's good, Derek." "Really?" "She asked me once why I thought I married you. I gave her all the standard answers. You were beautiful, smart, supportive, all of that. Then she asked if I'd ever actually tried to know you. Like, really know you. And I realized I hadn't. I'd created this version of you in my head that fit what I needed, and I never looked beyond that." I nodded. "I did something similar, I think. Created a version of you that I wanted to be real. The thing is," Derek continued, "I'm learning that I did that with everyone. My colleagues, my friends, even my family. I surrounded myself with people who reflected back the image I wanted to see of myself, and I never actually engaged with who they really were. That's a hard thing to recognize about yourself. Yeah. He smiled slightly. But I'm working on it. And Sophia? For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Not just for yourself, but for me too. I needed that wake-up call. Even if it was humiliating at the time. I'm glad you can see it that way. How about you? How are you doing? Good, I said, and realized I meant it. Really good, actually. I'm figuring out what I want to do next. Taking my time with it. That sounds like you. He paused. The real you, I mean. Not the version I created in my head. We talked for a few more minutes before I excused myself. As I walked back to my car, I realized that I no longer felt anger toward Derek. What I felt instead was a kind of peaceful closure. He was a person who'd made choices that hurt me, and I'd made choices in response that changed both our lives. Neither of us was the same person we'd been at the beginning of our relationship. And perhaps that was the only resolution that mattered. Spring came early that year. By late March, the city was already warming up, trees budding along the streets, that particular quality of light that makes everything feel like new beginnings. I was standing on the rooftop terrace of my building on a Thursday afternoon in April. Robert had mentioned that the rooftop amenity space needed updating, and I'd come to see it for myself. 43 stories up, you could see the entire downtown skyline. The view was extraordinary. Ms. Westbridge? I turned to find Robert coming through the terrace door, tablet in hand. I have the proposals for the rooftop renovation, he said. 3 different design firms submitted bids. I think you'll be particularly interested in the second one. They're proposing a complete transformation into a tenant amenity space with gardens, seating areas, maybe even a small cafe. I looked around at the current space, bare concrete, some rusted patio furniture that had seen better days, cracked planters with dead plants. It had potential. A lot of potential. Let's do it, I said. The second proposal. Make this into something people actually want to use. Robert made a note on his tablet. I'll initiate the contract. Timeline is probably 4 to 5 months for completion. That's fine. He hesitated. If I may say so, Ms. Westbridge, the changes you've been implementing have been excellent for the building. Tenant satisfaction is the highest it's been in the 7 years I've managed this property. Thank you, Robert. That means a lot. After he left, I stayed on the rooftop for a while, looking out at the city. Somewhere down there, Derek was probably in his office at Meridian, working on whatever project he'd been assigned to. Living his life, separate from mine now. I didn't hate him. That was something I'd realized over the past few months. I didn't even really resent him anymore. He was just a person who'd made assumptions and never questioned them, and I was a person who'd let those assumptions stand because it had been easier than challenging them. We'd both made choices that led to the end of our marriage. The difference was, I'd made my choices deliberately. Derek had made his unconsciously, never even realizing there were choices to be made. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia, divorce finalized. Judge signed this morning. Congratulations on your freedom. I stood there holding my phone, 43 stories above the city, and felt something settle in my chest. It wasn't happiness exactly. More like peace. Clarity. The sense that I'd finally stopped living in the gap between who I was and who people thought I was. For nearly 5 years, I'd performed a version of myself that was smaller, simpler, more digestible. I'd answered phones and filed papers and smiled at jokes made at my expense. I'd watched my husband explain basic concepts to me that I'd mastered years before. I'd attended company events as decoration, standing at the periphery while the real professionals discussed business. And all of that time, I'd owned the building they worked in. I'd been making investment decisions that generated more annual income than most of them would make in a decade. I'd been running a multi-million-dollar property portfolio while they assumed I was incapable of understanding a quarterly earnings report. The invisibility had been strategic at first. Then it had become a kind of experiment. How long could I maintain the performance? How long before someone noticed the disconnect? The answer, it turned out, was indefinitely. People would believe what they wanted to believe, see what they expected to see, forever if you let them. But I'd stopped letting them. 4 months ago, in that conference room on the 42nd floor, I'd made myself visible. Not by changing who I was, but by simply refusing to hide it anymore. And the world hadn't ended. Derek had been shocked, embarrassed, forced to confront the reality of who he'd married. The executives at Meridian had been stunned, uncomfortable, suddenly aware that they'd been underestimating someone for years. But the building was still standing. The leases were still valid. Business continued. And I was free. Free from the pretense. Free from the performance. Free from Derek and the marriage we'd built on assumptions and incomplete information. Free to be exactly who I'd always been, without apology or explanation. I thought about that woman I'd been 5 years ago. The one who'd met Derek at a charity gala and been charmed by his confidence. The one who'd taken a secretary job because she was bored and thought it might be interesting. The one who'd bought a building and kept it secret because she could, because it was hers, because she liked having something separate. That woman had been smart and strategic and maybe a little bit lonely. This woman, the one standing on this rooftop, divorced and visible and no longer performing for anyone, was all of those things too. But she was also free. Free to build whatever came next without worrying about who was watching or what they assumed or whether they understood. I pulled out my phone and opened a new message to Patricia. "Thanks for everything," I typed. "Ready for the next chapter." Her response came back immediately, "What's the next chapter?" I looked out at the city, at the building I owned, at the life I'd built in the spaces between other people's assumptions. "Whatever I want it to be," I wrote back. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I took the elevator down from the 43rd floor, walked through the lobby where security guards nodded respectfully, stepped out onto the sidewalk where afternoon sun was warming the pavement. My building rose behind me, 43 stories of glass and steel and possibility. I'd been invisible in there for nearly 5 years. Playing small. Performing limitation. But I'd never actually been small. I'd never actually been limited. I'd just been waiting for the right moment to stop pretending. And that moment had been worth the wait. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.